Okay, so longer episode incoming, and I've got some trailers and singles sprinkled onto this one, along with the usual assortment of movies and albums. As far as the quality of this selection goes, though, it's completely all over the map. But let's get started with Hunted, directed by Vincent Paranoia and starring Lucy Dubai. It's available to stream on Shudder and was released on the 14th of January. So as far as the whole feminist horror thing goes, Hunted isn't quite the insult to intelligence that the 2019 remake of Black Christmas is, but it sure does get frighteningly close. So the plot: Eve is a construction worker who escapes after being kidnapped by two men in a bizarre, misogynistic plot against her. So this is one of those unfortunate cases where I understand what the movie is trying to do, but technical incompetence and thuddingly obvious subtext hold it back. I'm not objectively against the whole feminist horror angle at face value, but you need to have a certain amount of trust in your audience in order to make it work. You need to trust that your audience will understand the feminist subtext without making it glaringly obvious. But this movie treats its audience like they don't have a chance of understanding the subtext, and therefore goes the route of spelling everything out so clearly that it ends up compromising the narrative as a result. Hunted ends up committing the cardinal sin of talking down to its audience, and it is insufferable as a result. That being said, talking down to your audience can work if you're trying to make some kind of satirical point or something like that, which I would say is true here, but the movie seems to be treating itself entirely seriously. Why else would you get those vast wide shots that are trying to be artsy near the end of the film if it wasn't taking itself seriously, at least to some extent? But of course, as you'd expect, there's nothing artful or intricate about the composition of these shots, nor do they even seem to contribute to any kind of narrative purpose. Then there's the editing, which is hands down some of the worst I've seen in a feature film. There are some sequences that the editing is clearly trying to inject with something of a psychedelic edge, but the style is so stiff, rigid, and lacking the effortless fluidity that it would need to pull that off, that I just want to point and laugh at how self-satisfied this movie is. There is no profound point being made here beyond just putting the hyper-masculine, misogynist archetype through the meat grinder in the least interesting and provocative way possible. Okay, there are strong performances in this movie from some, Lucy Dubai playing Eve with some feral intensity that I liked, but I've always considered good performances the absolute lowest bar to cross in terms of assessing the quality of a film. And considering Dubai is working with such a crap screenplay and production team who clearly have no idea what they're doing, her performance isn't redeeming anything. In fact, I bought a subscription to Shudder just so I can watch this movie. I just hope it doesn't set the tone for the rest of the movies coming to that service in the next 12 months. 3 out of 10 is pretty terrible. Okay, so next up, Sightless, directed by Cooper Carl. It stars Madeleine Pesch and Alexander Koch, and is available to stream on Netflix and has been since the 20th of January. So I was so close to actually enjoying this movie, but unfortunately it devolved into a convoluted mess at the crucial moment. So the plot is Ellen has suffered a trauma that has led to her losing her sight, and as she retreats from the outside world, she begins to question her sense of reality. Now, I like some of the ideas that this film is trying to play with. It considers the extent to which perception is reality, and if one is to lose that perception, how it might cloud their vision of what reality even is. If perception is reality, then what happens when that perception gets taken away? Does reality itself become compromised, or simply your perception of it? And I was invested in the themes enough that the bait and switch plot twist actually landed with at least some impact for me, even if the movie is pretty damn colourless and derivative as a whole, resulting to cliche, generic checklist writing where if you're looking for any kind of substance beyond the bare minimum, you're asking way too much. It's a movie that relies entirely on ambiguity in order to craft its tone. As such, all the characters remain largely anonymous. Now, this is both a blessing and a curse. The former, because that sense of unknowing works wonders in terms of crafting the tension in a lot of these sequences, but mostly the latter, as it results in a movie where the lack of distinct detail in the screenplay ends up really hurting as a whole. Maybe the lack of detail is somewhat intentional in order to emphasize the lack of detail with which a blind person might see the world. I can kind of see that working. But part of me thinks that I'd be giving what is an incredibly by-the-book thriller way too much credit. It might have a few intense flourishes, but between underemphasizing its characters in favor of an underweight plot that's more interested in ambiguity and on-the-nose subtext of making a coherent point, and how boring it can occasionally feel, it's not a movie I'm going to be interested in revisiting anytime soon. It gets a strong 5 out of 10 from me. Wish it did more with its ideas. So they are both movies that are available to stream right now. But here are a few that will be coming out in the future, starting with Kevin Lewis's 7th narrative feature, Willy's Wonderland that comes out on the 12th of February. Honestly, this trailer looks really cheap. Now that won't matter as long as the horror is sustained well, as this looks to be a horror movie, but hopefully it can make itself somewhat distinctive from other generic haunted house films. The overall cheapness of the vibe might actually help in making it at least somewhat distinctive, especially in regards to how the animatronics look. It's kind of legit creepy. But the creepiness will only work if the plot works around it. And the trailer certainly left plenty of questions about how that plot might play out, so consider me slightly underwhelmed, but more than a little intrigued. I will probably check this one out for sure when it drops. Next up, Lena Khan's latest one drops on Disney Plus on the 19th of February. It's called Flora Ulysses. Look, it's a dumb trailer for what's likely to be a dumb movie about a superhero squirrel. Does this require any additional commentary from me, really? That being said, this trailer does not suggest that the movie is likely to be taking itself all that seriously, even though I do feel like I'm going to struggle to get emotionally invested in the emotional journey of what is a CGI squirrel. Other than that, it looks like an utterly by-the-numbers kids movie that seems to be doing very little to impress beyond that. I can see this working at least somewhat if the movie can sustain that childish, chirpy energy that the trailer seems to ooze for its entire runtime, but I wouldn't put money on it. Next up, The Sinners, directed by Courtney Page, that comes out on the 22nd of February. Look, if your trailer is this painful to sit through, I'm not sure I'm going to want to see your entire movie, to be honest. So this teen horror movie seems to be about a bunch of conventionally attractive schoolgirls who form a cult and then get tortured for 90 minutes, 100 minutes, however long this movie is. And why, from that description alone, does this film feel like it would be the love child of the 2019 remake of Black Christmas and 2018's Truth or Dare? I was honestly shocked to discover that this wasn't being produced by Blumhouse, because, like most of their output as of late, this looks thuddingly generic and kind of incompetent. I'm all up for being proven wrong, but I'm not sure I'm going to stick around to find out. Right, on to the last two here. The World to Come is Mona Fastvold's second narrative feature, and it drops on the 5th of March. Well, looks like I'm going to at least be able to talk about one truly exceptional movie trailer in this episode. If you saw my best list for 2020, you'll know that Celine Sciamma's Portrait of a Lady on Fire was my favourite movie of last year. And this movie seems to be aiming to capture a lot of that same magic that made that movie fantastic. The main difference between this and something like Portrait of a Lady on Fire seems to be that there is a distinct masculine presence in this movie, The World to Come. My main hope is that this does not detract from the stridently feminist message the movie might be looking to tell, or detract from the intimacy of the two leads, who look like they may well have very good chemistry. I'm excited to see how this goes. I'll definitely be checking this out when it drops. Finally, and this is the one getting all the hype at the moment, Adam Wingard's Godzilla vs. Kong that will drop on the 26th of March. Can I just say, I don't care and just move on with my life? This is a movie where a big monster fights a big monster, and because that'll be enough to win over most audiences, I highly doubt this movie is going to be bothered with anything even remotely substantive, and unfortunately the trailer seems to back that idea up. And yeah, that's all I have to say on that. So that was mediocre. Hopefully the albums can offer something a little bit more interesting. Got 3 to get through, starting off with Maggie Lindemann's debut EP that came out on the 22nd of January. It's called Paranoia. Okay, so here's a question for everyone. Does anyone actually remember the song Pretty Girl? You know, came out in 2016, the song where Maggie Lindemann sings about people just seeing her as the shallow girl with the pretty face on social media and nothing else, with exactly the shallowness and lack of self-awareness that you would expect exactly from that archetype? No? No one remembers? Why am I not surprised? Okay, a shred of credit where a shred of credit is due. This EP did totally subvert my expectations. I had no idea that Lindemann was pursuing a pop-punk, pop-metal sound, so I was kind of surprised when this EP went off in some pretty wild directions. But I wish I could say I liked it more. Or at all, for that matter. And the easiest place to start with explaining why it doesn't work is with Maggie Lindemann herself. She definitely isn't a bad singer. On Crash and Burn, she proves her voice is a pretty decent fit for pop-punk in the same vein as Halsey. And Love Songs proves that she can pull off straightforward intimacy pretty well, too. But the problem is she doesn't project a lot of unique presence on these songs. But I don't think the problem lies with her, instead with her producers. I think they're the issue. They shove her voice midway to the back of the mix on songs like Different and It's Not Your Fault, making her seem like she's gasping for air. And it's not just the vocals, it's everything. This might be one of the most hilariously overproduced albums I've seen in a while across the board. The guitars are overmixed into slushy mush on songs like Crash and Burn and Different, to the extent that you can't even hear the undercooked melody on the hook of that louder song. And the vocal mixing isn't much better either. I've already talked about how Lindemann's voice is shoved to the back of the mix, but any edge that she might have in her vocals feels artificially removed, which makes no sense to me, and it doesn't match the style whatsoever. From a production standpoint, this album feels like an overthought mess, perhaps best exemplified by Loner, where everything, including any semblance of melody, just disappears into an empty mess of cloudy cymbals on the hook. Or maybe the horrifically mastered Gaslight is a better example, with its blown out low end and thin, rattly beat that for some reason someone thought was a good idea but ends up adding nothing. If you're expecting anything with any kind of heavy groove to it, well, the sharper percussion that actually builds some pounding momentum on Scissorhands wasn't exactly terrible. It's the only song where the guitars feel like they have any kind of revving, smouldering energy whatsoever. But maybe I'm thinking about this too hard. Maybe the production is supposed to sound like a complete mess in order to mirror the messy situations that Lindemann explores in her songwriting. But repeated listens revealed to me that is a limp justification at best, as a lot of the writing just isn't very interesting, or in some cases goes out of its way to undercut its own drama. It starts off early too. Knife Under My Pillow is a lumbering pop-punk track about her feeling paranoid about absolutely everything, but she acknowledges on the hook that it's all happening in her head and she doesn't really need to be afraid about anything, and thus all the drama promptly disappears with it. And let's not pretend that Gaslight is any better, with Sync Brain basically just playing word association on her screamed pre-chorus, and neither her nor Lindemann offer any ravishing words to the ex in question who apparently manipulated them. Without any details, nothing about the song comes across intimidating in the slightest. The writing on this album might actually be at its best when it's playing to a more basic framework. I might find love songs painfully boring, but at least it seems pleasantly written. And while Scissorhands, yeah, it's similarly basic and painfully melodramatic, but Lindemann playing the self-destructed girlfriend trying to push everyone away before she inevitably makes a mess of her relationships might actually be the most interesting lane for her on this EP. But any goodwill I might have had coming out of these songs is promptly erased once you get to Different. The song, which was apparently written about her being arrested in Malaysia for playing a show without a permit or something along those lines in 2019, which is pretty intense stuff that could make for an interesting song, but because her label wants her to maintain something of a polished image, you get no interesting or unique details about the event itself. It's a fundamental problem that plagues this entire EP. I will say that I'm delighted to see that a lot of people seem to be loving this album. I never want to wish failure on an artist, and I'm happy to see this EP getting a lot of love from her fans, even if I don't like it at all. I do think Maggie Lindemann and her collaborators have the capacity to make music that I might enjoy a whole lot more in the future. But this EP is an overmixed yet undercooked mess that fumbles over itself way too often to be tolerable. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but it's getting a strong 3 out of 10 from me. I think it sucks a lot. Now onto the latest country album by Aaron Watson. They dropped on the 8th of January. It's called American Soul. Singer-songwriter Aaron Watson is back with a set of 10 solid, if slightly unmemorable and corny country songs. I'll tell you what, the album certainly lives up to its title. As a result, it will probably read a lot better to American audiences who can relate more directly to the scenes that Watson sketches out. It's clearly trying to provide people with something comfortable and familiar in very turbulent times, and I respect it for that. Musically, it's likable, if middle of the road. Watson's warm, soothing charisma carries the breezy, light-hearted party songs like Silverado Saturday Night and Whisper My Name pretty well, but when he's required to be a bit more subtle behind the microphone, occasionally the corniness of the lyrics can distract from his presence, like on Best Friend. Fortunately, the production is this album's saving grace. Lush, organic, plenty of fiddle and hooks for days. This album goes down so easy it's almost scary. Now if you're like me and you like this sound, you'll find that a blessing, but if not, you will most likely find this album insubstantial and lacking in compelling drama. Because it is, that's definitely true. The writing on this album is kind of so broad and disposable that it doesn't really give me a lot to work with. The closest that Watson gets to telling a dramatic story is Best Friend, where the dog that's always been by his side through all the tough times has passed on, and he's left broken-hearted without anyone or anything to fall back on. It is unbelievably corny, make no mistake, but sincerity can make up for a lot, as is the case throughout the whole album. The closing tribute to his father on Dog Tags also falls into this territory. Even the underweight party songs are far too fun, bouncy, and loaded with organic texture to call all that bad or even mediocre. The only dud here is the slightly clumsily written Out of My Misery, where the title implies that Watson wants to get out of this relationship ASAP, but the opposite idea is reinforced in the writing as Watson pleads for one last night with this person, and it just feels kind of stilted and awkward. But when the album is as effortlessly infectious as it is, I kind of find it hard to care. Make no mistake, there is much better country music out in the world, but this, it's a lightweight and insubstantial slice of solidly produced music that will do wonders for just passing time. I'm not going to guarantee you will remember this album in a week or two, but you might enjoy it more than you think. It's getting a 7 out of 10, it's solid stuff. Okay, so now on to Surprise of the Year. K-pop group I-dle, or G-I-dle possibly, I think most people seem to agree it's just pronounced I-dle, are back with a new project that dropped on the 11th of January called I Burn. I'm so happy I found a K-pop album or mini album or EP or whatever on earth this is supposed to be that I genuinely love. It is a bit weird to say, as you'd probably expect someone like me who loves mainstream pop music as much as I do to be a die-hard K-pop stan, but unfortunately that's not really true. I find most of what comes out of the genre to just be blaringly annoying and oversold, not helped by some terrible synth tone choices. But of course it would be unfair to classify the entire genre in that way, and I-dle proved that in the best way with I Burn, a tightly weaved, frighteningly cohesive project lyrically if not musically, that has won me over on this group on its strength alone. One key way that this group won me over initially was how they often participate in the production and writing of their own songs, with GeoNeon putting in most work behind the scenes with writing credits on every song and production credits on most of them. The result is an album that feels like a uniquely personal artistic statement, and you can't say that about many hyper-polished K-pop groups, can you? It helps that the production on this album is insanely tight. Sure, it might be borrowing from a half dozen different styles of music, as K-pop often does, but it's doing it so effortlessly and with a thematic cohesion that cannot be denied. But we'll get onto that thematic cohesion in a bit. As for the music on these songs, well, the gorgeous sweeping piano and strings that create the cold, wintry atmosphere effortlessly on the opener Han, Alone in Winter, the tropical synthline and explosive triumph of the hook on Dahlia, to even the songs that play for more quiet restraint like Lost, they all work for me. I was even impressed by how organic a lot of the production feels. Take Hua, for instance, a song that I really like for its more rigid percussion and driving bass, but the horns that come in later on that song just catapult it over the top for me. And then you get the electrifying guitar that comes out of nowhere on Moon, a song produced by Millie, and the bass line that sounds like it's actually coming from a real bass guitar on Where Is Love. Just other examples of why this album sounds so much fuller and more expressive than the overwhelming majority of K-pop that I've heard. I-dle are clearly willing to take artistic risks to elevate their sound, and nowhere does that become more apparent than in the songwriting and thematic arc that this album follows. The whole breakup arc that the songs seem to coalesce into might seem fairly disposable at first, but I-dle ramp up the theatricality and shoot for the stars in a way that you don't often see in pop. They marry the abstract with the universal in a surprisingly profound and satisfying way. It all starts with Han, Alone in Winter, a post-breakup song that sees the protagonist trying to get over some ex, and it's not going well, to put it lightly. The lingering feelings aren't helped by the frustration of feeling that you're somehow being selfish by not letting go your emotions and wanting this person all to yourself. Or, as Sujin and Minnie put it in the English translation, I miss yesterday, so I resent today. But Hua seems to show that the situation isn't entirely hopeless. All they have to do is wait, and the sun will come up eventually and melt away all the snow. The implication is at least that the protagonist is on the road to recovery. That is, until Moon reveals how easy it is to retreat into the dark rather than focus your attention on striving towards the light that you're not even necessarily sure is even there. Or, to use the metaphor for the song, even the moonlight can be too much to bear sometimes. But retreating into the dark isn't necessarily a bad thing, because once you've done it, once you've had that moment of introverted reflection, it can be much easier to map a path forward from there. And Where Is Love shows them doing exactly that. On the first verse, Soyeon describes how she's still thinking about this ex, but instead of regret, she now has the energy to smile about it, taking the first steps towards moving on. The song is about discovering a way to live in the present, moving through past feelings and becoming a better person on the other side, and finding that it is possible to love again, even coming out the other side of a breakup, even if you haven't found the person you're going to share that love with yet. But just because it's easy to push regrets to the back of your mind sometimes, with the benefit of time, doesn't mean it's easy to get rid of them entirely. Lost describes how the protagonist feels forcibly erased from her ex's life, where every thought that she has about them is clouded by the fact that any attempt to rekindle that relationship would no doubt end in disaster, probably for both of them. Regrets start to turn into memories, and in a desperate moment of melodramatic clarity, she goes running right back into her ex's arms on Dahlia. And honestly, I'm a little on the fence about how well it works. After all, the arc of the album revolves around the protagonist getting over her ex. So for them to end up back together in the end not only feels like a horrendous anticlimax, but also feels like a significant betrayal of the album's themes. That being said, however self-destructive the closing track Dahlia is, it does seem at least vaguely self-aware about it. As it turns out, a dahlia is a flower that symbolically has represented strength and change, but also dishonesty and instability, all four of which are very relevant to the album's themes. What I'm trying to say is, maybe it's genius and I need to stop overthinking this dumb, melodramatic, hyper-polished K-pop album and just sit back and enjoy the meticulously produced bangers that this album has to offer. If you do that, you'll probably enjoy it, but if you do choose to dig a little deeper, you might find an unexpected gem. 8 out of 10 might go down as one of the best of the year. Right, so we're going to start off our track reviews with a new one from rapper Dessa. It's called Rome, and it dropped on the 15th of January. Whoa, Dessa has done it again. She's honestly just so good, it's hardly even fair on anyone else. The dense production works absolute wonders on this track in creating that fiercely political atmosphere that's more than reinforced by Dessa's insane spitting. She comments on how society has evolved for the worst and how corrupt systems have allowed bad people to rise to the forefront of the cultural conversation, but more importantly, how it wasn't always like this. She reminisces on a time, possibly an entirely different reality, where anyone who rejected the patriarchal systems was free to up and leave whenever they wanted. The difference now is that those patriarchal systems she speaks of have become so embedded into societies all over the world that finding any kind of escape from it is a tough task indeed. But even if revolution seems as distant as ever, it's not going to stop Dessa from taking every opportunity to twist conventional gender roles and make sharp statements across the board, with the standout line being, Chekhov says you've got a gun, you gotta use it. Guess they're reading Chekhov downtown in their cruisers. Whoa. Honestly, just Dessa's ability to pack so much punch into her individual couplets is insane, and the song is so quotable it's untrue. I guess if you do anything long enough, the body gets used to it, but the greater question is, how do you break that habit? Is it even possible, especially after centuries of patriarchal enablement? Sounds like an impossible task, but Dessa does seem to believe that the revolution is on the horizon. That Lady Justice ain't blind yet. We just need to keep fighting. Next up, Silk City have returned with a new single with Ellie Goulding called New Love. It dropped on the 21st of January. You know, I think way too much about this in comparison to how much I should, but the fact that that Silk City song, Electricity, with Dua Lipa wasn't the international smash hit that it should have been in 2018 still annoys me to this day. Make no mistake, the song was huge internationally, it just should have been so much bigger. The only thing I could think when listening to New Love was that it was so clearly trying to recreate the magic of their previous single without really any of the firepower. Ellie Goulding might be a pleasant enough presence on the song, but I'm not sure her voice flatters this production, especially on the repetitive hook that is nowhere near as silky smooth as it thinks it is. At her best, Goulding needs something fuller and more sweeping than what Diplo and Mark Ronson managed to give her here. A shame, because I do mostly like the song. It's got an upbeat, bubbly energy to it, and Ellie Goulding playing the girl so overwhelmed by love that she's just coasting through it all effortlessly. It's a good fit for her. I do like the song, it's just definitely not better than what came before. Moving on, let's talk about the latest one from Jetty, Bones. It dropped on the 22nd of January, it's called That's All. Now, I'm a big fan of Jetty Bones. In fact, Kelsey Galuzzo might be one of the most underrated songwriters in pop, and this is the first song I've heard in the run-up to that debut album that's coming out in February. Unfortunately, the jittery production on this track, as well as its lack of a distinct hook and abbreviated runtime, means that I probably like this song less than anything on her previous EP, Hyphen. It just doesn't quite flatter Galuzzo's vocals as well as the smoother pop rock that characterized Hyphen did so effectively. That being said, the off-kilter style of this track might actually match the writing. It's about being in an awkward place in a relationship where she's looking for some confirmation that her love for this person isn't being misplaced, as she doesn't want to continue having to suppress her feelings, something that her partner seems to be doing as they're clearly nowhere near as confident and open as she is. But by the track's end, she acknowledges that that's okay, and the only thing that needs to matter is that she loves them. It's a sugary sweet song that I ended up really liking. I just hope that some of the rest of the album we can see the return of some of that pop rock shimmer that I love so very much. That's all. Now onto something a whole lot less good, Joshua Bassett's Lie 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 that came out on the 14th of January. Okay, so we'll get into the drama associated with this song in a bit, but Joshua Bassett channeling his inner Shawn Mendes for a sour and obnoxious kiss-off track is not something that I or anyone else needed to hear. Outside the context of the drama, this is an unlikable and flimsily produced Shawn Mendes reject that still could have been workable if the performance at the centre of it had anything close to a unique presence behind the microphone. But when viewed in the centre, in the context of that Rodrigo, Carpenter, Bassett drama, the song becomes insufferable in record time. Okay, so something I need to address here. Some people have claimed that because Bassett posted the original draft of the song on his Instagram in November 2019, that the song couldn't be about his alleged relationship with High School Musical, the series co-star Olivia Rodrigo. But then you consider that this song was dropped precisely a week after Rodrigo released Driver's License, which was also speculated to be about that alleged relationship, and the striking similarities between the two music videos. It's clear that even if the song wasn't originally written about Rodrigo, it's clearly targeted at her now, and therefore it becomes impossible to see the song in any other way other than relevant to that drama. And once you tap into that mindset, you realize that this song sucks a lot. Why on earth does Bassett try to suggest that Rodrigo acted like he was the only one to blame, implying that she refused to take any responsibility when Rodrigo says on the hook of Driver's License that the relationship wasn't perfect on either end, including hers? She wasn't playing the entirely innocent, broken-hearted good girl that Bassett clearly thinks she was on that song, which makes his claims that she is somehow lying to herself feel even more without merit. It's just indicative of the most shallow possible interpretation of that song. Then there's the hook, where Bassett thinks he has the dignity to play the, "Oh, poor you wrote a song about me, you're clearly not over me, well boo-hoo, because I'm getting over you, so there, I win" card, which doesn't even make any sense. After all, if Joshua Bassett was actually getting over Olivia Rodrigo, do you think he would have released this song at this time with a video so similar to Driver's License? Yeah, probably not. In other words, it's blindingly hypocritical, as if it couldn't get any worse. And look, I'm not even the biggest fan in the world of Driver's License, but at least that song was sensitively and emotionally written, rather than coming across as painfully frail and manipulative as this does. But we are not done yet, as there's another player in this story that we haven't addressed yet. That's right, the blonde girl, Sabrina Carpenter, Bassett's alleged current girlfriend who chipped in with her latest track, Skin, that dropped on the 22nd of January. So I went into this track expecting a snarky diss track directed at Rodrigo in the same vein as what Bassett pulled. But that's not actually what this is, surprisingly. I mean, I'm not sure it's all that well produced. It feels distinctly grooveless, and Carpenter trying to split the difference between Camila Cabello and Selena Gomez and her vocals certainly isn't helping. But it turns out Carpenter is actually a solid songwriter. That's news to me. Didn't know that. Sure, she's going to be a little infuriated that Rodrigo hasn't moved on from Bassett already and is wearing that fact like a badge, but instead of wallowing in the frustration of the whole thing for the whole song, she addresses Rodrigo directly on the bridge, saying how she hopes that they can be friends, if not now, then at least somewhere down the line where they can just sit and laugh about all of this. Carpenter is self-aware enough to address directly how disposable what the drama really is, and even offers Rodrigo a note of comfort and hope, saying it won't always be this way. I wish Bassett had the dignity that Carpenter exhibits on this song. Against all odds, it actually ends up a decent teen pop song that made a perfect conclusion to the trilogy that absolutely no one asked for. What can I say? I kind of liked it. Finally, and I saved this one for last for a reason, Priscilla Arn's new single, You Make the World a Better Place. It dropped on the 29th of January. So, Priscilla Arn is one of my favourite songwriters I've ever come across. Her 2008 debut album A Good Day is a masterclass in subtle pop songwriting that balanced out the whimsical abstraction with crushing reality to ruthless and ravishing effect. But it's also the kind of album that I could have probably done with hearing as a kid. I probably could have really appreciated it at that age. Yeah, I probably could have done with hearing it in 2008 when it came out. It seems to tap into that childish part of my brain effortlessly. It was no surprise to me to do some research and find that she released a kids album in 2016 called La La La, but it was in 2014 when she made a mark that would cement herself as one of my favourite writers ever with Just Know That I Love You. The album acts as a companion piece to Studio Ghibli's movie When Marnie Was There, directed by Hiromasa Yonebayashi, that also happens to be my favourite movie ever. It's an adaptation of Joan G. Robinson's children's novel of the same name, that also happens to be my favourite story of all time. You're sensing a pattern here? And Just Know That I Love You can also be read as an adaptation of that same story, taking the introverted themes and pairing them with the willingness to acknowledge that sometimes the best thing to do if you're feeling emotional is just to sit there and cry. That album resonated with me on such a profound level last year when I heard it for the first time, and probably deserves a video of its own to deconstruct it in detail, but that'll have to wait for another day. Outside of the aforementioned kids album that came out in 2016, La La La, we have basically heard nothing from Priscilla Ann since Just Know That I Love You. Which means, with this new song and upcoming EP, she is faced with a daunting task of following up an album that will go down as a classic for me. How do you do that? Now, I was excited going into this track, but coming out of it, I'm left with a sinking feeling that I might need to readjust my expectations somewhat. Some of this is a matter of the obvious. Priscilla Ann is almost 7 years older than she was when Just Know That I Love You came out. And the world is a much different place too. I need to get out of my head and acknowledge that this upcoming EP is definitely not going to be Just Know That I Love You Part 2, however much I desperately want it to be. I was also a tad disappointed to discover that Priscilla Ann didn't write this song, Benji Hughes did. Certainly not a cause for concern, but I hope the EP as a whole is more true to her unique artistic vision. So with all that being said, I've talked around this song long enough, so let's talk about it, and honestly, I wish I liked it more. Don't get me wrong, You Make the World a Better Place is a fine enough song. It's pleasant and certainly approachable, but it ends up one of the unfortunate cases where the discussion about the context and the personal history I have for the artist is a lot more interesting than the discussion about the music itself. It's a straightforward, feel-good pop song with way too much reverb, where every instrument is blurred into hazy mush rather than them being allowed to breathe organically. And that's before the blatantly synthetic bass is layered onto everything on the second hook. But production nitpicks aside, the song is certainly one of value, even if it feels kind of impersonal. I'll reiterate the point I made earlier. I hope that the EP is more her artistic vision than anyone else's. I've still got my fingers crossed and my expectations are adjusted accordingly. I'm looking forward to hearing the full thing. So, this went on longer than expected, as these always seem to do. There were some gems, but a whole lot of rubbish too. I hope I'm able to present better stuff in the future. I'll see you next time.